Okay, before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors for the share this evening, Claire and David Allman, who sponsored, to thank the Adat Aaron's group for all of their efforts during this time. It's really been a tremendous chesed, and in particular to Baylor Hotel, who's been coordinating the efforts. And it's really great that as a community, we look out for one another to make sure that we are all staying safe, which we're going to see is going to be the topic of the shir this evening. And we also the shul is sponsoring the classes to congratulate all of our graduates, especially under these times. We're able to accomplish this tremendous goal is something quite significant. Before we begin the class, I want to just remind everyone if they could please mute themselves in order so that could be optimal listening experience for everyone. Let's begin. So we gave a short introduction last week to the series that we are embarking on, which is the Torah of the coronavirus era, some of the great debates, great decisions, and great deciders. We're going to be focusing on the deciders and the decisions that were made by both my Rabbi, Maran Hagaon, Rav Hershel Schachter Shlita, is one of the greatest Gedolei Yisrael today, living in Washington Heights, New York. Rav Schachter is unbelievable. We're going to speak about his halachic process and decision-making when posed with some of the most incredible decisions that any posek in the history of the world ever had to make. And also Hagaon Rav Asher Weiss, one of Rav Schachter's closest friends, who in Eretz Yisrael has really been carrying the burden in answering these very, very difficult questions. We gave a brief introduction last week to who these people are and what qualifies them to being the great deciders during this period. Tonight, I'd like to discuss the great decision that was made by both of them, and it was really a unanimous decision that was made to close our shuls, to close our schools, and really the halachic imperative, the requirement that's upon each and every one of us to follow the guidelines that are set out, not just on a government level, but even the guidelines that are being provided from the medical professionals, of course, and also from the halachic institutions, our gedolim, when they tell us to be even more stringent, let's say, than some of the government guidelines, why it's necessary for us to follow those guidelines. And that was a question that a lot of people were bothered with which was, people would ask and say, listen, if we're able to go to the supermarket, so then why is it that we can't go to shul? You go into the supermarket, it's full and it's bustling. Okay, so people are maybe keeping distance, and people are wearing masks, and okay, fine. So we'll do the same thing in shul. So why is it that we're not completely back? And even now, we're still davening outside, and slowly, in the next few days, maybe we'll end up moving inside. But we're still keeping it, to a very, very extreme, precautions that are in place, and following guidelines to the nth degree. When you look around the rest of the world, especially in San Diego, where it was never really that bad in the first place. So why is that we have to follow to those to that extent? I'll give you an example. I was on the phone with Rav Schachter. It was about a month ago. I was on the phone with Rav Schachter, and I was asking him, different questions. Some related to the coronavirus, others completely unrelated. And he wanted to make a point to me as to why, that this is not a joke, that the halacha requires us to be so serious. The example he gave, he said that, being that I'm an older person, he's almost 80 years old, Rav Schachter. He said that being that that's the case, if I had to attend, these are the words he said, if I had to attend my own mother to the
lower risk of a fatal heart attack on it.
Please remember yourselves. I'm so sorry.
Your doctor about Jardians.
He says to me, if I had to attend my own mother's Levaya right now, I wouldn't go. Because we have an obligation to take care of ourselves. So this comes straight from the Torah, where the Torah says, "Ushmartem es chukosai ve'et mishpatai." The Torah tells us that we have an obligation to follow God's commandments. Asher yaseh otam ha'adam v'chai behem, that we have to do these commandments, that we as people, we as Jews have to follow the commandments of God, v'chai behem, and we have to live by them. Ani Hashem, I am Hashem, your God. So the Gemara in Yuma on Daf Pei learns from here that v'chai behem means not just that we have to live by the Torah, but it's that v'chai behem, that we have an obligation to live. V'chai behem v'lo sheyamos behem, meaning that if we have to make a choice between life and following a mitzvah in the Torah, for example, keeping Shabbos, where the choice is that if I kept Shabbos right now, then my life would be at risk. So says the Gemara, I have to break Shabbos in that scenario because life comes first. V'chai behem v'lo sheyamos behem. And I heard from Rav Shechter many times, he would quote from the Chazon Ish, that when it comes to the area of pikuach nefesh, which means that we have to put our lives first above everything else, with the exception of 3 negative commandments. The 3 negative commandments being murder, idolatry, and promiscuity. That when it comes to shvichos damim, avodah zara, and gilui arayos, so then we would give our life before committing those heinous crimes. But other than that, or if it's something that is coming at the expense of the truth of the Torah, says Reb Shlomo Luria, that would be another example we'd have to give your life, because that'd be a subset of idolatry. But other than that, we have an obligation to keep our life instead of following the Torah, where the Torah mandates us to break Shabbos. So I heard from Reb Shechter many times, well, there's a lot of gray area in Pekuach Nefesh, where, for if you ask one doctor, let's say, so this doctor would say that no, your life is not at risk. You're sick for sure, but you know what? If you were to deal with this in 24 hours from now, so then you probably would be okay. But if you ask another doctor, the doctor would say, "What are you talking about? You should go to the hospital right now. You shouldn't wait. You should go to the hospital right now." So in a scenario where there's some gray area, like Pekuach Nefesh, where it's not certain, where there could be a svek sveka of a Pekuach Nefesh, a svek sveka of a Sakanas Nefashos. So what would we do in that scenario? So the Gemara seems to say, black on white, that even if it's a suffix sakana, it's going to be something that you would have to give, that it would end up taking your life, or your life would be at risk. Still, we have to go to the nth degree to take care of ourselves. And even if you maybe would have one doctor say that it's not a problem, another doctor would say it's another problem. So the Chazon Ish says, well, it depends on yourself. Or if you're nervous about it, so then you have to make sure that you watch yourself completely. And this is really where the mandate would come in, which is why, the medical professionals are saying that, let's say, people over the age of 65 are more at risk, or people with underlying health conditions during this, if they were to contract the coronavirus, it would be, more serious for someone like that. So they have an imperative, they have an obligation of a chai behem. But this is really talking to the individual, that the individual has an obligation to watch out for their life. So if you were to take, let's say, then a very fit, 20, 30-year-old that is in prime health, or you take a child who, thank God, is in good health, and, if they were to even contract the virus, at least, this is a very fluid situation. So, facts and statistics change all the time, and, we learn new things all the time. But, we'll just use, the examples that are going around. So you take someone like that who's healthy, who is in the right age bracket, really, really, really low risk. So such a person, so then they don't have anything to worry about. They should be able to go out without a mask. They should be able to convene a minyan without having to worry about being too close to one another. So okay, fine. So then we shouldn't have to worry about anything. And then okay, fine. Those that are more at risk, so they should have to take care of themselves. They should stay home. Okay, but me, I'm not at risk per se. Maybe it's an extremely low risk, but me, myself, I'm not at such a high risk. So then if that's the case, Chazon said, if I'm not nervous, so then I don't have to worry about it. So then I should be able to go out and act and do my regular activities. However, this is not true. And in order to understand why it's not true, first we have to deal with a basic question, which is, so what if my doctor told me I have to stay put or I have to wear a mask? So what? Why do I have to listen to the doctor? So there's a very famous Gemara in Bava Kama. The Gemara in Bava Kama tells us where the Torah says in Parshas Mishpatim, Rapo Yirapeh, that if someone is sick, so then they go to the doctor, and the Gemara in Bava Kama says that and God will heal them. So the Gemara in Bava Kama says from there we have an obligation to go to the doctor if we are sick, and we find that this is the mode that the Tanaim and the Amoraim took, that our great sages took in the Talmud, that they would follow the medical advice, whatever facts they had at the time, that they would follow that advice. So the Gemara tells us in Maseches Ksubos the following, that there was a certain magefa, there was a certain plague that was that was called Rasan. That the Rasan plague, which was apparently a terrible skin disease, almost like it was like a form of leprosy that was extremely contagious. So the Gemara says, Machash Rabbi Yochanan made an announcement. Hizhiru mizvuve shel balei harasin, that one needs to be very careful about the flies that are flying in the air during this period of during the Rasan period. Why? Because the flies might bite you, and then they will end up giving you the virus. Reb Zera took a different approach. Reb Zera lo have a Yosef bezika. Reb Zera would not sit near people that had that had this virus, meaning he would keep his distance. Rabbi Lazar lo ayel ba'alei, that Rabbi Lazar would never go into such a person's tent, meaning even if they weren't there, but the place may have contracted some of the virus, so then he wouldn't go into that place. Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi lo havi achli mebei dahi mebua, that Rabbi Ami or Rabbi Asi would not eat the food that may have been contaminated with the virus. So what's the common denominator between all of these Amoraim? The common denominator is that they asked their medical professionals, they didn't, make this up. They asked their medical professionals, so they had facts at the time that told them, that this is the way to contract the virus. And each one followed, they're not quoting psukim over here. They followed whatever medical advice they received, and they followed suit. They had to either, one kept distance, another would stay away from the flies, whatever it might be. And that's not even the point as to what exactly they did. The point is that they followed the medical advice. The Gemara in Bava Kama takes it even a step further. There's a Gemara in Bava Kama on Daf Samach Amud Beis that Rabbi Usher Weiss has been quoting throughout this coronavirus era, where he writes the following. Throughout the pandemic, he's been quoting this Gemara that says, Tanu Rabbana, our rabbis taught, Dever Ba'ir, that let's say there's a plague in the city, Knos Raglecha, that one needs to bring their feet inside the house. Shne'emar, as the Torah says, in when the Torah talks about the plague of Dever, which was the plague that affected the animals, V'atem lo titzu ish mepetach beisu ad boker, that you should not go outside of your house until morning. V'omer lech ami uba b'chaderecha v'skor d'latecha be'adecha. That and Navi Yeshayahu also, when there was a plague, he told the people, he said, "Go, my people, go and enter inside your rooms and don't leave," meaning quarantine yourselves. so that you should not come to contract this terrible magefa, this terrible plague. We know that in history there have been terrible plagues that have occurred. This is not the first. The Spanish flu not too long ago, the Black Plague, which wiped out half of Europe. We have an obligation, says the Gemara, that during a plague, we have an obligation to stay away from it and keep ourselves isolated. This is actually quoted in the Gemara. This is quoted by the Ramah. The Ramah of Moshe Isserlis, in his commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, he writes the following: Od kasvu sheyesh livroach min ha'ir kishedever ba'ir. That when there is a plague in the city, we have to leave the city even. Don't wait until it gets very bad, says the Ramah. Rather, you have an obligation to go and leave as quickly as possible. This is the obligation possible. Now, again, we have to ask the question. So, okay, fine. So I understand when the Torah tells me that if there's a dangerous plague going on, so I have to follow the advice of the doctors. And I understand that, if I potentially am vulnerable, so then I, have to take care of myself. But again, we have yet to address the question, which is, so then if that's the case, why is it that me, the healthy person, why is it that I would have to make sure to let's say wear a mask in public, or I have to make sure that I keep distance when I attend an outdoor minyan, and things of that nature. So there are really two answers to this. One is found in the Binyan Sion. The Binyan Sion is an unbelievable posek. He was a Yekisha posek in the late 18th century, early 19th century. His name is Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger. He has a few svarim. One sefer he has is strictly a halachic work called the Binyan Sion, which is a work of responsa, questions and answers people would ask him, that he was, halachic inquiries that he would address. Then there's another work he has, which has been accepted as kind of like the Bible on the laws of Sukkah and Daled Minim, the four species. So during the holiday of Sukkot, the sefer Bikurei Yaakov, which was written by Rav Yaakov Ettlinger, has been accepted completely as Torah law, as the final word in this in his mastery over the laws of building a sukkah, of fulfilling the mitzvah of sitting in a sukkah, of living in the sukkah, and the mitzvah pertaining to the Daled Minim. And then he has another work, which is probably the work he's most famous for, which is the work called Aruch LeNer. The Aruch LeNer is a commentary on Shas, where the Aruch LeNer goes through a number of Masechtas on Shas. He writes in his introduction that he's coming off of the coattails of the Pnei Yehoshua, where the Pnei Yehoshua wrote a commentary to understand Rashi and Tosos. Basically, he elucidates Rashi and Tosos' commentary on the Gemara, and every Masechta that Pnei Yehoshua did not cover, the Aruch LeNer kind of filled in those gaps. But the work is unbelievable, because he doesn't just elucidate Rashi and Tosos and explain, or he'll bring his own question and give an answer. No. What he does is, it's kind of like a teacher's manual of, this is how one is supposed to learn Rashi, not just here, but in all of Shas. So if I were to try and recommend to someone who was getting started in learning Gemara in depth, where they're learning Rashi and Tosfos and they're starting to learn in depth, that one of the key works one would have to learn in tandem with their study of Gemara is the Aruch LeNer, or Yaakov Ettlinger, in how he's able to guide you in how to properly study Rashi, is unprecedented and unbelievable. So the Aruch LeNer of Yaakov Ettlinger was posed a question. The question was, regarding mitzitza bepeh, which in recent years also had some controversy associated with it, which is basically that when doing a bris milah, so there are a number of things the Gemara says that one has to do, aside for the basic halachos that we find both in the Torah and from halacha Moshe Sinai. Number one, the obvious one, which is removing the foreskin. Then the Gemara brings down a halacha Moshe Sinai, the Mishnah says, of priya, where there's an additional membrane that needs to be broken, and when performing a bris milah. And then the Gemara says that there's something else that needs to be done, and that is called mitzitza. Mitzitza is drawing a little bit of blood, which the Gemara says is something that was done for refuah, that the doctors at the time assumed that this is something that was necessary to be done for the health of the baby. To make sure that there was blood flow after the bris milah, you needed to suck some of the blood from the makom, from the place of the bris milah, to make sure that there was blood flow there. Today we understand that that's not a necessity to be able to actually suck out the blood, but regardless, this is brought down in Shulchan Aruch, and this is something that we do. But we do this in a way that keeps distance. There's no physical contact that takes place between the mohel and the baby. It's done through a tool, through a tube, and it's very sanitary the way that it's done today. However, there were a number of poskim, and this was a big issue that was discussed by the Chassam Sofer. This is, an issue that was discussed in that time in the 18th. End of the 18th century, early 19th century, that period. And then today it resurfaced a little bit, but it's been, for the most part, definitely in centrist Orthodox poskim have squashed doing mitzitza b'peh. But the question was posed that doing the tzitza actually with the mouth, actually putting your mouth on the place of the bris milah. So the question was posed to Rav Yaakov Ettlinger. Rav Yaakov Ettlinger discusses the issue in a few different responsa, and he comes out saying that this is not a practice that we should do. Even though he says that probably there's not going to be a sakana, there's not going to be it's not going to put the baby's life at risk by doing something like that. But he says that afilu be'echad mini revavos. But even if this is a 1 in a million chance that this can cause, that this could put the baby's life at risk, we have to stay away from it. Even if it's a 1 in a million chance. And the Magen Avram says the same thing with regard to breaking Shabbos when someone is in labor. When someone is going through child pangs and going through the labor process, so the Shulchan Aruch says, of course, it's brought down in the Gemara, that one needs to make sure that they break Shabbos. They do whatever is necessary to break Shabbos for the woman. And even after the baby is born, for the first 3 days, we break Shabbos for the woman, even if she says, no, I'm fine, you don't need to break Shabbos for me, you don't need to heat up water for me, you don't need to turn on the light for me. We don't listen to her, and we break Shabbos anyway. And even though, says the Magen Avram, we know that women are able to heal, thank God, bli ayin hara, very well after having a baby, and even the birth process is something that we've been doing since the beginning of time. And this is not something that is categorically, let's say, something that is, like, let's say, a heart attack, which of course it's not a question. The person's life is on the line. But however, childbirth, people have babies at home. It's not, you don't need to drive to the hospital. However, even if it's a 1 in a million chance that this could put the person's life at risk, we break Shabbos in such a scenario. So that's the first answer. The first answer is that why is it that me, a person who is not necessarily in the high risk category, a person who, thank God, is of good health and I'm young. So why is it that I have to make sure that I wear my mask? Why is it that I have to make sure that I keep my distance? Why is it that I have to make sure that I don't attend minyanim that are too crowded, that even I have to think twice before going to the super? I have to be very careful. I have to follow the guidelines. Why is that necessary? Because even if there's a 1 in a million chance, so I need to be extremely careful. But then there's a second reason, which I think might be even more important, something that is very difficult to argue with. The second reason starts with a Sefer HaMitzvos. The Rambam, along with many other Rishonim, tried to work through grouping together what make up the 613 mitzvos, where the Gemara in Makos tells us, based on the pasuk Torah tziva lanu Moshe Mora Shakilas Yaakov, that Torah was commanded to us through Moshe. Torah, its numerical value equals to 611. That was given to us through Moshe because two mitzvos were given to us straight from God, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and Lo Yelecha Elohim Acherim, that we have an obligation to believe in God and not to follow any other quote-unquote gods. So 2 plus 611 equals 613. This is the Gemara at the end of Maseches Makos on Daf Chaf Dalid. And the Rishonim all try and learn from there exactly what are the 613 mitzvos. What are they? So the Rambam has his list of what the 613 mitzvos are. The Ramban Nachmanides, who was 10 years old when the Rambam passed away, but he has, his list of what the 613 mitzvos are. The Bahag, the Baal Halachos, the Gedolos has his list. The Sefer Mitzvos Gedolos, the Sefer Mitzvos Katanos, Rav Sadia Gaon, many different Rishonim, the Sefer Achinach, all have their list of what make up the 613 mitzvos. On the Rambam's list, the 184th positive commandment in the Rambam's list is the obligation to build a roof around one's house, where the Torah tells us that we have an obligation to build a ma'akav, asisa ma'aka le gagecha, that we have to build a fence around our roof. Why? Because lest someone, God forbid, who's on our roof fall, and God forbid that would put their life at risk. So to minimize the risk that would take place for someone else, we have an obligation to put a roof around the house. But when the Rambam quotes, and this is unbelievable, when the Rambam quotes this obligation to put a roof around the house, which is a pasuk in the Torah, the asisa ma'aka ligagecha, we have an obligation to put a fence around our roof. That's not the way the Rambam brings down this mitzvah. That, for the Rambam, is the source of a much bigger mitzvah. The Rambam says the following: Hi shitzivanu lahasir hamechashulim v'hasakanos mikol moshvosenu. That we have an obligation to remove anything that would, God forbid, cause danger from our midst. If there's something that has the potential to cause danger, so we have an obligation to remove that danger. And this, says the Rambam, is really the reason why we have an obligation to build a fence around the roof or around our pits or anything of that scenario. We have an obligation to do that, because there's an obligation to remove any potential harm that would face another person. Says the Shulchan Aruch, when the Shulchan Aruch brings down this halacha, the very end of Choshen Mishpat, he says, V'chein kol michshol sheyesh bo sakanos nefashos, anything that could potentially cause harm to someone else, mitzvahs esei lahasiro. We have an obligation to remove it. Uli shamer mimenu li zar b'davar yafeh. We have an obligation, even though it's not necessarily going to cause harm to me, but it could potentially cause harm to someone else. I need to make sure that I am not the cause of that. So I know my roof very well. I know that, I'm not going to fall off of it. I know, the different booby traps in my house. I know where there, are pits in my field where I know how to avoid it. But if there's someone else that comes over to my house that is not in tune with the makeup of my house, so when I have an obligation to remove the sakana. My grandmother, she should live and be well. She's an amazing woman. Her name is Sheila Farber, lives in Somerville, New Jersey. She is one of the strongest people I know. So sometimes as children, we got a little bit of insight into just how strong of a woman, she is. Where, for example, if we had our elbows on the table during mealtime, so she would, in a very stern way, but in a very grandmotherly, pleasant way at the same time, would tell us, little Willie, strong and able, take your elbows off the table, right? In the sweetest possible way you can imagine. So there was one time where she was having a sleepover at our house. So she was staying probably in my room or my brother's room, and we would bunk up with one of our other siblings. And she'd walk up the stairs to our house. She'd go into my room and she'd say, "Daniel, this place is a mess. Please pick up all your things before I get settled in." Of course, Mom, no question. So I go into the room, I clean up, I say, "Mom, the room's ready for you." So she comes back to the room and she says, "It doesn't look any different." So I said to her, "Mom, what do you mean? I made you a path. From the bed till out of the room. I made you a path. I moved away those things. I made you a path." I went back and I had to clean up everything again. It's not just enough to make a path. I need to make sure that there's nothing potentially in the way that she could stumble over, that God forbid she could fall, break her hip, break her elbow, break her shoulder. I need to move everything out of the way. If there's some, I know my room. I know how to jump over all of my different things, my toys, my clothing, I know how to do that. But she doesn't. She's a foreigner to the room. And therefore, I need to make sure that there's nothing that could potentially get in the way that could cause harm to her. Shena Emar, says the Shulchan Aruch, as the pasuk says, "Shishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha." We have an obligation to watch our neshamas completely. Ve'im lo hisir veheniach michsholos, and if we don't remove these dangers, meaning, i.e., I don't put on my mask and could potentially, through the water particles that I'm spreading to the air, the million of different that potentially could carry disease with it, could fall onto someone else, and they could, God forbid, fall ill from that. So then, I have negated a positive commandment over, and I violated below tasim damim by God forbid, potentially causing manslaughter, says the Shulchan Aruch. That if there's something that could potentially be causing harm to someone else, so then I can't even think twice about it. Of course, I need to make sure that I'm not going to be the cause of that. I need to make sure that I remove any sort of damage, that I am not the cause of anything that can cause someone else harm. Rav Shechter, Shlita, put it amazingly. I want to just quote to you something that Rav Shechter said when he first made the decision to tell everyone that we have to close our shuls. He says, "Some well-meaning individuals have blown out of halachic proportion the significance of tefillah b'tzibur." This is a quote, and Talmud Torah Barabim, and have opted to ignore the suffix sakana, have opted to ignore the potential threat presented by the coronavirus when in conflict with these two important mitzvos, meaning keeping shuls open and yeshivas open. We live in a generation where many B'nai Torah tend to exaggerate the significance of Torah and Tefillah. Although their intention is certainly l'shem shamayim, because of course these things are important, we must all keep in mind that when paskening shilas, when answering these questions, one may not rely on an exaggeration. All exaggerations, this is what he says. These are not my words, these are Schechter's words. All exaggerations are by definition sheker, a misrepresentation of the truth of the Torah. Rav Chaim Volozhiner signs off quite a few of his chuvos, the founder of the Volozhin Yeshiva, with the following statement: Kel emes, no sein lanu Torah's emes, u bilti el ha'emes elenu. That the true God gave us the true Torah, and we only look for the truth. Any exaggeration in the area of Torah and halacha is certainly a misrepresentation of our religion. The commentaries of the Shulchan Aruch refer to the comments of the Marshal in his Sefer Yam Shel Shlomo that to misrepresent a law of the Torah constitutes an aveira related to avodah zara, and as such would be subject to the principle of giving up your life before committing. With respect to a suffix sakana, the halacha clearly requires that we go to the extremely lechumra, especially religious Jews. We have an obligation to be extreme when it comes to the area of potential sakana, potential threat, potential danger, as opposed to all the other halachos, aside for the three major halachos, that of, God forbid, murder, promiscuity, idolatry. Anything else, though, is supposed to be done in a constructed way, under the right circumstances. Not, God forbid, it potentially put someone else's life in danger. And that's why it is so important for us to follow these directives. Just in the last week, Rabbi Asher Weiss reiterated this importance when, so his kollel reopens, just like shuls are reopening, and some restrictions are starting to be lifted, and you go out into the street and not everyone's wearing a mask, and it's people are becoming more lax in not just the restrictions are becoming more lax, but people's attitudes are becoming more relaxed. And Rabbi Asher Weiss addressed his kollel by basically reminding everyone the importance of wearing a mask. I want to share with you this video clip. This is in English. He was speaking to his kollel, which is in Hebrew, but then later he made a public statement in English saying the same thing. So this is that public English statement. He writes the following. He says the following. This is Rabbi Asher Weiss in Eretz Yisrael.
Most of the shurim I've been giving for the past 3 months are associated with the coronavirus, with COVID-19. And we hope that finally we are approaching the end of this crisis. Let's hope and daven and pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We still need to be extremely cautious and take care because we are all afraid of a second wave. But hopefully things are getting better. And this week we opened shuls in Eretz Yisrael, and I opened my kollel. And I spoke yesterday, I gave a shir to my kollel, and I told everyone, if you can't wear a mask the entire Seder, then please learn at home. And you will get the same payment. I will have no payment, but if you want to come to kollel, you need to wear a mask. So we are still extremely cautious. Every day we get up davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Please give us yata d'shmaya, sheHaKadosh Baruch Hu yishmor v'yatzil v'yagen.
Rabbi Asher Weiss makes it very clear that even though things are starting to be more loose and restrictions are being lifted, that doesn't mean that the seriousness of this is becoming it has gone any less, and we need to treat this with complete the same level of seriousness, just like it says in Shulchan Aruch, anything that could potentially lead to causing any sort of sakana, any sort of danger to someone else, and it says esei lahasiro, we have to do whatever we can to make sure that's not going to happen. These decisions that are being made by our Gedolim and our obligation to follow what our Gedolim are saying is really been something that during this period has really come to the forefront as something that is not just that we have to follow them because the same way I ask a rabbi, the rabbi tells me I do this. I accidentally used a dairy sponge in a fleishik pot, and that. But during this period also, these are real halachos, where this is not just that we're trying to be PC and follow the guidelines accordingly. No. This is a halacha, and the halacha might even mandate us to be more stringent. And even though that might not be popular to be more stringent, but who cares? We follow what it says in the Torah, v'chai behem, and we have an obligation to make sure that that we don't spread any sort of disease, that we're just reading Shulchan Aruch. It doesn't necessarily matter what it says in the guidelines. It doesn't matter what the government tells us. It doesn't matter, it matters at some level if, let's say, we wanted to be more lenient and the government was being more restrictive, then we would have to follow what the government's saying, potentially for, God forbid, it would cause any anti-Semitism. But if the government is being more lax than what the halacha requires, of course we have to follow what the halacha says. It's not even a question. It's part of the halachic system. Rav Shechter, recently issued a psak that, and throughout this time he's been issuing piskei halacha that are very, very serious. And we'll get to more, over the next few weeks, more of these extremely difficult and heart-wrenching questions that were asked. Questions like, having to split a ventilator, questions like, having to choose between who gets a ventilator, questions like, there was a question that Rabbi Asher Weiss was asked about from Paris, that there were the Beis HaKfaros, the Jewish cemetery was filled up. And they had to ask, what is it better? Is it better to bury one mace on top of another, or to go to a non-Jewish cemetery? These are questions that are unprecedented. It's the Gedolei Yisrael are really carrying everything on their shoulders. So a friend of mine, Rav Shai Shechter, who's a rabbi in the Young Israel of Woodmere, New York. So he's Rav Shechter's son, and he asked his father, during this period, he said to him, Abba, when did you have time to, prepare all of these answers, right? Like these are very serious questions. Like, and you're issuing these piskei halacha one after another. You're on the phone all day with rabbi, medical ethicists, heads of hospitals, and you're issuing these piskei halacha. You're issuing these halachic decisions. When do you have time to actually prepare all of them? So he said in the most humble way, he doesn't say this in a haughty way at all. He said, I don't know, I've been preparing for the last 80 years. Our Gedolei Yisrael are not just, just making this up. This is part of a system that they've been attached to their entire lives. And when they tell us that we have to be more stringent, then we have to be more stringent, because as we learned this evening, when going through the halacha, going back to the original sources of the Gemara, and going through the Ramah, and going through the Shulchan Aruch, and going through the Rambam, and going through, and we see how obvious it is that we have to take this situation in a most serious and sincere way, and follow through, making sure that we, God forbid, do not spread any sort of illness and virus. Next week, we're going to discuss another one of the practical questions that have come up, and how the poskim have dealt with issues pertaining to the coronavirus. We'll stop here for now. If anyone has any questions, I could hang on for a couple extra minutes to answer questions.